Weren't you also on the Appropriations Committee?
Yeah.
Now, that really is something for a freshman.
Yeah. Well, I got on the Appropriations Committee, but the big thing for me was when Zell Miller, when Zell got elected governor, and then Pierre Howard got elected lieutenant governor. And I had been one of the people who stuck the neck up for Pierre, because you remember Joe Kennedy was president pro tem at the time, and everybody thought he was going to win. But Pierre had been my friend for so long, and I, believed in his progressive philosophy, and so I just stuck my neck out and said, I'm for Pierre Howard, and eventually he won. Well, right before he took office, at that time the lieutenant governor appointed all the committee chairmen, and I told Pierre, I said, look, I would like to be chairman of the Appropriations Committee because I've only been in the Senate for 3 years now, and I know that's maybe a little bit unusual, but I've got some ideas that I think we can reform the budget process, and I'd like to bring more people into it. And I'd like to start working on the appropriations bills before the House sends it to us. Because, the House has, under the Constitution, has to initiate the bill, but that doesn't mean we can't start working on it. And I remember when we did start working on the appropriations bill before they sent it to us, Terry Coleman, who was the chairman in the House, came to me and said, what y'all doing? You don't even have that bill yet. We ain't even sent you a bill yet. What they would do under Speaker Murphy, is they would work on it up until the bitter end, and then they'd send it to us, the Senate, and you wouldn't have time to really respond. And so I appointed all these subcommittees to be working on different parts of it before they sent it to us. But anyway, back to how I got appointed to that job. There was some controversy because Pierre was going to, word got out, and I never really questioned him about this, but that he was going to appoint Charles Walker, who was he had been in the House for a long time, but he just got elected to the Senate, to be chairman of the Health and Human Resources Committee. And people like Culver Kidd and some of the older guys who've been around for a long time started complaining and said, we don't want that. You got to, be here, even though he's been in the House for a while, you can't, appoint him to that committee. So Pierre came to me and said, I know you want to be chairman of the Appropriations Committee, but look at all this criticism I'm getting about, and I haven't even decided to do it, about appointing Charles Walker to be chairman. Walker had helped him in Augusta and so forth. And I said, okay, well, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but I think I'm going to run for majority leader then, if that's the case, because I'd rather be chairman of the Appropriations Committee, but I think I might be able to get elected majority leader. I had been assistant floor leader for Joe Frank Harris in the second year I got there, and I developed a lot of friendships and relationships with people in the Senate, and I started calling around. Wayne Garner, who I mentioned earlier, who was also a friend and ally of mine, he was already running for majority leader, and he thought he had it locked up. He thought he had Pierre's support, but Pierre said, look, I have not committed one way or the other on that. If you want to do it, you do what you have to do, but I'm not going to help you. And so I started making calls, and I called a lot of the new members. One of them was Sonny Perdue, who was a new Democratic member from Bonaire. And I called a lot of other people and started piling up names of commitments for people who would support me to be majority leader. And then I decided to call Wayne and tell him about it. When he picked up the phone, he said, "Whoa, man, you've been making some calls, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah, I have." But I just wanted to talk to you and let you. I didn't want to do this behind your back. I mean, I'd started earlier in the day, but I was, people had called him who had already committed to him, and but I had gotten up about 20-something commitments, and the Senate didn't have but 56 members, and I forget how many Democrats there were at the time, but this is all just Democrats, and so I had a really good shot at doing it. And so he said, we need to meet, and let's meet with Pierre. So we went down and met with Pierre, and you know, Wayne had helped Pierre in his election also. You know, he started out running himself as for lieutenant governor, and he dropped out of the race and threw his support behind Pierre. And so I told Pierre that, look, I'd rather be chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and I'll drop out of the race if we can, you know, reach that commitment. And so ultimately, that's how I got appointed, was showing I had enough support, you know, for majority leader to where it wouldn't be controversial for him. And but then at the same time, Nathan Deal decided he wanted to run for President Pro Tem. Now this was an issue because Terrell Starr was running for President Pro Tem. Terrell had been chairman of the Appropriations Committee under Zell Miller, and he felt that when Pierre announced that he was going to appoint me chairman of the Appropriations Committee, that undercut him because he wouldn't have a place to go if he didn't win President Pro Tem. And I threw my support behind Nathan. You know, he and I have been close friends, and I thought, you know, we needed some new blood and some progressive approach. And at that time, Nathan was a moderate. He's not as moderate as he was because he switched parties, and you have to do what you have to do, I guess. But Nathan got elected, and then Pierre set up a new committee that he appointed Terrell to be chairman of. But so that's how that kind of worked out. But Nathan and I and Wayne Garner were the subcommittee, or the conference committee, on the appropriations debate with the House. Mm-hmm. And so the three of us worked very closely together. And we passed a bill out of the Senate on the reform of the budget process. I had put together a committee of outside experts, including Donald Radachek, who was at that time a very important economist from Georgia State, Tom Loth, who's now the dean of the School of Public and International Policy School here, SPIA, was on it, and I had somebody from McKinsey and Company. We had 4 or 5 people, and they helped us put together this bill for reforming the budget process. And we took really a new approach. I thought we were going to have trouble with the House, and at first they were grumbling about it, but then they got together with us and we worked all the differences out, and they decided they were for it too. So we passed it in my last year in the State Senate in 1992, and it really was pretty strong bill. But when it got to Zell, he called me after the session was over, when he was looking at the bills, whether he's going to sign them or not, and told me that he had decided to veto the bill for different reasons. And I don't remember what they were now, but I know that when they took it up again the next year, they started with that bill and then passed another one that was to his liking. And so anyway, I feel like I was involved heavily with the reformation of the budget process because of that. And also I changed what the Senate did in their Appropriations Committee by setting up these subcommittees who really looked in depth into each of the issues. Because the way it worked beforehand was when the House sent it over, really the Senate didn't have very much time with the bill. And what they would do is get in a small conference room next to the Appropriations Committee chair's office, and if you wanted to get something in the budget, you had to go knock on the door, more or less. I mean, people were standing out in line, and you go in and talk to the Green Door Committee. I forget what they called it. It wasn't. That's what they called it in the House, but it's a small subcommittee it was the only subcommittee they had in the Appropriations Committee. And if you wanted, I remember I wanted to get, they were trying to close Hart State Park, which is in my district. And I went to the Appropriations Committee and got them to add 3 more cabins there. And so it saved the park. but I'll never forget the sort of humiliation you had to go through to speak to this big group of about 10 senior members to get them to put something in the budget. But that's what the whole process was about. It wasn't looking into the whole state budget. You were just looking into what you could put in different people's districts, and I felt like that was not the right approach. And then later, what we proposed was passed in most of the substantive part. But those are the main things I was involved in. I handled a lot of legislation for Zell. One was the State Hobbs Act, which was this crime, creating a crime for public official abuses. I remember at that time Bob Barr was the U.S. attorney in Atlanta, and he had just prosecuted that congressman, I can't think of his name right now, but from the 4th District, got Ben Jones beat after he got indicted. You might think of his name.
Pat Swindle.
Pat Swindle, that's who it was. And Barr had prosecuted him and a few other people, and we met with Barr to talk with him about this legislation. Zell got me and a couple of other people involved, and so we got that passed. I also did a lot of work with the Attorney General, Mike Bowers. He had several pieces of legislation I handled for him. But those were the kinds of things that that I was involved in the state Senate. But I really wanted to, and I have to say that I enjoyed my time in the state Senate more than anything I'd ever done in my life, because it was something substantive, something that you could do and make a difference on, and there wasn't much partisanship going on. I mean, I worked as closely with some Republicans as I did with some of my Democratic colleagues. Skin Edge was one in particular. He and I hit it off very well. Mike, I'm getting old and I can't remember names right off the bat, but there were several others, Republicans who were more progressive.
Mike Egan.
Mike Egan. Thank you. I'm glad I brought you along. Mike Egan was a very smart guy and progressive guy. Things have changed so much now. You just don't have people, Democrats and Republicans working together on anything. But if I wanted to do a bill, whether it was this countywide toll-free calling or appropriations or budget process revision, I'd go to Skin and get him to help, because he later became the minority leader, but he was at that time Coverdale was the minority leader, and I worked with Coverdale too a lot. Even when I got elected to Congress and he got elected to the U.S. Senate, we were always very cordial friends. When I got appointed ambassador later in '98, Coverdale was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, then chaired by Jesse Helms, and Paul and Max Cleland both came to the committee and testified on my behalf. Paul wrote a nice letter, and Helms was very nice to me too. He was very harsh partisan in a lot of ways, but for the job that I had, and I'll talk about this in just a little bit, but was being the chief textile negotiator, and that carried the rank of ambassador with it. He was very much in favor of the textile programs, and all the textile industry was behind me, so it was easy for him to support me. But he gave me a real glowing introduction. But I say this because of Paul. Paul and I got to know each other in the state Senate, and then he was appointed by George Herbert Walker Bush to direct the Peace Corps. But before that, we had a good cordial relationship, and he was a good friend of Pierre Howard's too, and of course Zell's as well. And it just shows how much difference there is now between the way it was then. But I decided that I really wanted to do something more in international and national security issues. And also I was having a hard time financially when I was practicing law and spending half my time, literally, the 2 years that I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I spent half my time on state Senate work. And the pay for that was $10,000 a year. And, you know, it just, the numbers didn't work. And I had some good people working for me in my law office, but, you know, if you just really couldn't make ends meet. That's the reason there weren't so many lawyers in the legislature, because if a lawyer sells his time, and if you're almost giving it away somewhere else, there ain't that many hours in the day. So I decided I wanted to have a full-time job in politics, not necessarily a career, but I just, you know, felt like I couldn't pay my obligations and still, you know, stay in the state Senate and keep my law practice and not commit malpractice. So I decided to run for Congress when Doug Bernard announced that he was going to retire. He was from Augusta and had been congressman there for, I think, about 16 years.
16 years.
Yeah, and along with Ed Jenkins, I think they may come in at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed decided he was going to retire. And so Nathan Deal and I both decided to run at the same time. Actually, he decided a little bit after I did, because Ed didn't announce he was going to retire until kind of late. And but Sanford Bishop also ran at that time. He had been in the state Senate with us. Mac Collins was ran as a Republican, of course. And all of us got elected. It was a big turnover that year. But that was in 1992. And Bill Clinton also got elected in 1992. And of course, we were all very happy that Clinton won. I think my career would have lasted a lot longer if Bush had won. George Herbert Walker Bush had won that year. But I liked Clinton, and I thought he did a good job. I mean, I still think he did a terrific job. You know, he may not go down as one of the great presidents for a number of reasons, but he certainly on budget issues and all of that, I think he did a really good job. When I was running for Congress, I ran on like Ross Perot, that helped get Clinton elected. You know, that we need to reduce the deficit. It was going over $200 billion. That doesn't sound like much now, but back then that was that sounded like an awful lot. And of course, it was a lot more, you know, as a percentage of the GDP. But since I had been chairman of the Appropriations Committee and, you know, had been heavily involved in reforming the budget process, and living through a time when it was a severe budget crisis, not as bad as the one now, but in 1991 it was a terrible budget year. We had really revenue dropped significantly. I'll never forget, we used to go to the governor's mansion and meet with Zell and with Tom Murphy, and, you know, with the leaders in the Senate would go with the leaders in the House, and we'd try to work things out with, you know, in that crisis. It was in August of 91, and that was before Clinton had announced that he was going to run. But one day he showed up at one of our meetings there at the governor's mansion, and Zell introduced him to all of us because they had gotten to know each other as on the, you know, the Southern Governors Association and the, maybe Democratic Governors Association. And he spoke very highly of him, and but I'll never forget that was the first time I met him. And so when I got elected to Congress, I had been running on several things, but one was trying to balance the budget. And this is why I'll talk about the budget issue and the budget vote I had. In you know, shortly after we got there in '93, the president came up to Congress and gave a budget speech. and said, look, we're going to have to do several things. We're going to have to raise taxes, and we're going to have to do some severe cuts. And so he tried to balance it out with his budget proposal that went before the Congress. And during the campaign, I never took any kind of pledge that I was not going to raise taxes. Every time I get asked about that, I say, I think you can't do that. That's not responsible. You can't. You have to. You have to. But then I would say I don't think we're going to need to, because I think we can cut enough out of the budget to do it that way. And when back then, and I guess they're still doing it, but they used to send everybody to the Kennedy School in Boston and Harvard, and where you'd get briefings on every subject under the sun. But of course, that year, the big issue was budget, because everybody was very concerned about the rise in deficit, and that's when I found out that it could not be done without some tax increases. Because I was hearing from not just, Democratic economists, I was hearing from a broad range of people. And they just said, if you look at the budget, we're $200 billion in the hole. And that's not to mention the debt, but it's just the annual deficit. And the whole Pentagon budget at that time was about under 300 billion. I think it was about 250. And about half the budget was in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, entitlement programs. That's under the law. You really can't. Money is going into those programs from those of us who are paying, payroll taxes. You can't really cut that back in a way that would affect the budget. So you have to look at the discretionary money. A lot of people say, well, we're going to get rid of foreign aid. Well, foreign aid is about 1% of the budget, if that. And there's just fraud, waste, and abuse was another thing that people used to say. We're going to get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse. Well, if you took what I used to say when I was going around talking to constituents about it after I figured out, what kind of problem we were really in, is if you took the entire Pentagon and shut it down, just got rid of our national defense altogether, you still would have a deficit. You can't, let's talk about fraud, waste, and abuse. It's not all in the, Health and Human Resources, department. Environmental protection, you could eliminate that, and that'll get rid of about maybe, just a very small percentage. But you couldn't resolve the problem. And then others would say, well, look, we're just going to grow out of it. Let's reduce taxes and then we'll grow out of it. Well, that was impossible, because at that time, Alan Greenspan, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, wouldn't allow inflation to get over 3%, or wouldn't allow growth rates to get over 3%, because if they got over 3%, he'd worry about inflation. And so you'd have to get the growth rate up to 5 or 6% in order to grow out of it. So it just was not possible to do it that way. And the only way you could do it was with some tax increases and some and some healthy budget cuts. So when they presented the way it works in the Congress is you pass a budget resolution, and then once you get that budget resolution, that's what you've got to work with. And then it has to be reconciled with taxes and with cuts in the end. So the big vote was on the reconciliation. You hear about reconciliation a lot now because they use it for different things, but this is the budget reconciliation bill. And all of us, except for Roy Rowland from Georgia, voted for the budget resolution, including Nathan. I keep mentioning him because he was a close friend of mine. He and I voted exactly alike for the first 6 months we were in Congress. I remember one time Sanford Bishop came up to us for some vote and said, how are you guys going to vote on this? And he wasn't saying, like you might walk up to a group and say, get each one's opinion. He knew that we were going to vote exactly alike, and he wanted to know how the two of us were going to vote on it. And so all of us voted for it, except for Roy. And in the Democratic group, and at that time I think we had 2 Republicans, Newt and Matt Collins, and I don't know if there was any more at that time, but most of us were Democrats, and so we passed the resolution, and that's when things started getting controversial. At the beginning of the summer, I think the budget resolution passed in the spring, but you know, with all the rhetoric that was going on, you know, the talk radio and everything was just piling up at that point. Nathan decided to vote against the budget in '93. In August of '93, he had voted for the budget resolution, which you know assumed that you were going to have these cuts and these tax increases. But Buddy Darden and I and Sanford, you know, and of course Roy had already voted against the resolution even. You know, we're planning to vote for it. But as things started moving during the summer of '93, I started moving away from it because I didn't like mainly the energy tax, you know, the gas tax that was put on there. And you know, I felt like that was not necessary. But you know, you have to vote at things in a package, and so I started moving away from it. And there were several of us, freshman Democrats from all over the country, who started moving away from it. Nathan had already jumped ship totally, but the rest of us, you know, were still debating what to do. And toward the end, you know, I was moving away from voting for it, thinking that we could vote it down and then come back and you know, bring in a few Republicans and and get a little bit more moderate package, take out the gas tax. But I knew that there had to be tax in there in order for it to balance. Ultimately, it's not going to balance in in the beginning, but ultimately there had to be some tax increases. So the day before or the day of the budget reconciliation vote, which I think was August 5th of '93, we were getting ready to go on recess, so-called district work period, and right after this vote, I was still debating it, but I was leaning heavily against it, or thinking I was going to vote it down, or vote or no. And during the day, I started getting calls from all over the place. One call I got was from Pierre and Lewis Massey. Lewis Massey was his chief of staff at the time, and they said, "We just calling to see how you doing, Don. How's it going today?" And I said, "I'm in a state of high anxiety right now." And but that was one of the friendly calls I got. I also got calls from a lot of calls from Al Gore, you know, the vice president. And one time I was talking to him, and my administrative assistant looked in the door, and she said, "The president's on line 1." And so I said to Gore, I said, "The president's on line 1. Can I take that call?" And I heard him say in the background, "Hey, are you calling Don Johnson?" They were in the same room together. And Butler Derrick, who was a congressman just across the river in South Carolina, had been there since, he was one of the Watergate babies, they called them, the people who got elected after Watergate in 1974. And he's part of the leadership. And he was in my office talking to me about this bill, because he comes from the same territory I do. He's from Edgefield in South Carolina, but he had been around for a long time. And but he was sitting there when I was talking to Gore and then to President Clinton, and then a couple, and I told Clinton said to me, "What would it take to get you to vote for this?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I don't like the Byrd rule, the effect it has on this proposal that we had to put a cap on the growth of health care. you know, that was one of the major problems of the budget was the growth of rising cost of health care. And we wanted to put a cap on it. In fact, we did in the House bill. But when it got to the Senate, the Byrd Rule, which is named after Robert Byrd from West Virginia, said that in a reconciliation package, the Senate, you know, it would not be germane to have anything other than purely budget items. And putting a cap on the growth of health care costs was not possible under that Byrd Rule. So the Senate took it out. And so I said to Clinton, I said, you know, if they can put that back in there and get that passed, because that's really would help solve the problem. He said, well, look, I don't have any control over that. That's the Senate's problem. Would it help if you could talk to George Mitchell, who George Mitchell at the time was the Senate Majority Leader? I said, not really, but you know, a few minutes after we hung up, Mitchell calls me, and I could tell he didn't want to talk to me, you know, but he was being forced to because the president asked him to call me, and he said, I said, look, you know, is there any way you can, you know, waive this Byrd Rule to get this, you know, the cap on the growth of health care? And he said, I don't know, you know, I'll do the best I can, but you know, we're going to take it up in a separate bill after we pass this budget reconciliation, and we come back in September. And but I can't promise it. You know, I don't know what's going to happen, and we can't put it in this bill. So we hung up, and a few minutes later, somebody else called, and Butler was still sitting there in my office, and he said, "Who is that? The Pope?" Because I'd already had a call from the president, the vice president, and the Senate Majority Leader. And but after a while, I called up some of my freshman Democratic colleagues, and we had already been talking, you know, about what we were going to do, and so the three of us, a guy named Eric Fingerhut from Ohio, and a guy from Washington whose name I'll think of, man, I can't rely on you for this one, but the three of us went to see Dick Gephardt, and this was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the vote was going to be at like at 6:30 or 7, and we went to see Gephardt, and we said, look, we're sorry, but we're not going to be able to vote for this. We think that, you know, maybe if we can vote it down, we're very much in favor of deficit reduction, but we think that, you know, we can come up with a better bill, and if we vote this down, there's a possibility that we can do that. And you know, you have to have a budget. So you know, if we vote this down, we'd have to come up with something else. And Gephardt said, look, I understand where you're coming from, and you know, I don't agree with you. I don't think that we can get a better bill at this point because the partisanship is so rife. But you know, I understand. Well, you know, he didn't try to twist our arms or anything like that. It wasn't a Tom DeLay type of approach. He said, look, you know, I wish we had you, but you know, we understand. So the three of us then walked back to our respective offices and got ready for the vote. Chuck Toney, who is currently working here at the university, he was my press secretary at the time. He's speechwriter in the public affairs section here now, but he kept coming into my office and says, have you decided what you're going to do? Have you decided what you're going to do? Because I've got the press is hounding me, you know. And there's one guy in particular in Augusta, Georgia, on the Morris newspapers, Augusta Chronicle, a guy named Phil Kent. You probably know him.
Right.
He was the editorial page editor at the time, and was just a vicious, vicious opponent of anything that Clinton did, or and later anything that I did. But at this time, he was wanting me to say that I was going to vote against it. And so I told Chuck, this was really right before I walked over to the vote, I said, okay, you can go ahead and tell him I'm planning to vote against it. I've already told Gephardt. And the speaker, Tom Foley, you know, had never contacted me about it. You know, he's a very nice guy, but he, you know, maybe this is the difference between Gephardt and Foley and Pelosi and the Republican side, you know, DeLay and Boehner and those guys. They just, you know, they didn't get into, you know, twisting arms. And since we'd already told him we were going to vote against it, I said, okay, you can tell Kent that I'm going to vote against it. So then I get up to start walking across the street. My office was in the Cannon building, and I was on the ground floor and just walked straight out. My son, Cleet, was up there that summer working as a tour guide at the Capitol. He was a freshman in college, just finished his freshman year at Harvard, and he had been up there working, and of course he was off since it was so late in the day as far as the tour guide job. But he and some of my staff members were going to walk over and watch the vote from the gallery. And I hadn't seen him all day, and he said to me, Daddy, how are you going to vote on this bill? And I said, well, I think I'm going to vote against it. He said, you are? Why are you going to do that? And I said, well, I think that we can, if we vote it down, I think we can come back with a more bipartisan approach and get a bill that would pass that, takes out the gas tax, takes out, maybe lowers some of the taxes and increases some of the cuts, just to make it a little bit more moderate bill, but still have an effective bill. He said, oh, okay. So we all walked over together. He goes up in the gallery with the other staff members, and I decided to go in. I don't want to talk to anybody on the House floor. So I go sit in the middle of one of those rows, far away from, I didn't want anybody to contact me at that point. I was already made up my mind what I was going to do. So the unfortunate thing was that I had to sit through 2 speeches by Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey. And they got down there and were just railing against this thing and said, this is going to put us in a deeper recession. It's going to basically end Western civilization as we know it. I mean, I'm exaggerating here a little bit, but if you go back and you read their speeches, it was just going to be the worst thing that ever happened in America if this bill passes. It's just going to cause, you can't raise taxes during a recession. You can't, it's not going to increase the surplus or create a surplus. It's not going to do anything but make things a lot worse. And there's no way you can raise taxes at all in this kind of environment. And literally, the description of what was going to happen, it was like apocalypse now, and I got to thinking, I'm going to be voting with these guys, and I'm thinking that that they're going to come back afterwards and let anybody on the Republican caucus vote with Democrats that will raise any taxes at all. Well, I've completely fooled myself. And I got to thinking that, look, if I vote against this, it'll be purely political cowardice. That I'm doing this no other reason but to save my hide, because clearly we can't get a bill that reduces the deficit other than this one, because the Democratic caucus is already very diverse. You had very conservative people on that bill who voted against it, by the way. A lot of them did. Now, some of the ones that had a little bit more courage voted for it. But, it was, I had just fooled myself. If I was thinking that there were going to be any Republicans who moved over and voted with us on anything that was, it did the least bit of damage to the deficit. So about that time, I get a page comes over and sees me about halfway, down the bench, and said, "You have a call here," and it said, and I looked at the message, and it said, "The president wants to speak to you on booth 2 back in the in the caucus room." So I said, "Okay, I'll go talk to him," because I had decided at that point, that the basis for the reason that I told my son that I was going to vote for it had turned out to be wrong, if not a lie. And so I went back to him, and I got on the phone with him, and I talked to him 2 or 3 times that day, and it never said I was going to vote for it. In fact, decided to vote against it. And I said, look, the things that are most concerning to me is we need more deficit reduction, and I think that you can increase the budget cuts by $10 billion. You know, without a bill like this, and that we need to. I would like for you to commit that you'll support a cap on healthcare costs rising. And there was one other thing, but it wasn't anything like building a bridge in my district, you know, or anything like that. You know, one time he said, "Look, I'll do anything within my presidential authority to help you get reelected." And all I could think of was, you know, there ain't nothing you can do to help me get reelected. You know, you're so disliked in my district that the only thing you can do is stay away, you know. But certainly I don't want any help from you. But I would like to have these commitments. That way I can at least say I got something for, you know, for committing to you that I was going to vote for it. And he said, okay. So those three things, and I've got them written down on the back of that pages thing in my safe at home. I'm going to give them to the Russell Library here. And so I decided, then I went down and I told Foley and Gephardt that I was going to vote for it when it came up. I changed my mind and I decided to vote for it. And so when the vote came up, I didn't wait. I just went right over there and voted, and then I left the chamber. And of course it went on for a long time, and some of the people you know, were waiting to see how many votes they were going to have before they, you know, put their name down. And so it passed by one vote. You know,
your vote.
My vote, you know, I mean, you could say it was my vote, and a lot of people did. And you know, I'm really proud of that vote. You know, it took me a long time to get there, and there are not many times when you are swayed by the arguments that you hear from the floor of the House. But I was swayed by what Gingrich and Army said, you know, in a negative way, that convinced me that I had to vote for it. So after that, I had been scheduled to go jog with the president the next day. And when I walked back into my office, people were cheering in there. You know, because it had passed by the time I got back. And they were cheering that it passed. But they thought I'd voted against it. And when I told them that I voted for it, their faces just dropped. You know, I'll never forget Beverly Bell was my AA, and you know, she was smiling when I got there, and she had the biggest scowl on her face, you know, after I told her that. And then when I called my wife and told her, she was mad at me, and you know, it was, I had a few people that, you know, said, look, we're proud of you for voting this way. But it was a really tough sledding after that. I had scheduled, I think, 20 town hall meetings for the month of August. I had like two or three a week, and they were all, I'd say, hell. You know, a lot of people were out doing Codels, you know, these congressional delegation trips abroad, and some people were down at the beach. Some people were at home with their family. I was out on the campaign trail fulfilling my promise to do all these town hall meetings. And I had the same group of people, these ditto heads from Rush Limbaugh's show. You know, they call them ditto heads. And they would follow me around everywhere I went and just try to disrupt the meeting. And I would be up there like a school teacher trying to show about the budget and how, you know, where it all went and how we couldn't just create this by waste, fraud, and abuse and, you know, getting rid of the welfare and getting rid of, you know, foreign aid. It was not a simple thing. And I had one meeting down in Grovetown, which is near Augusta, if you know where Grovetown is, in Columbia County. And the mayor down there was a good friend of mine, and he was kind of the MC, or going to be the MC of it. I had another lawyer friend from Augusta, Ben Kay, down there, who also was helping me in that area. But there was a talk radio guy down there from Columbia County and had this radio show, and I can't think of his name right now. Maybe you can think of it for me. But he and I got along very well, but he was trying to be like Rush Limbaugh. And I would go on his show all the time, and you know, in field calls and everything, and he and I had a very good relationship. But right before that, you know, right after that budget vote, he just whipped up the whole Columbia County, and they came, you know, like you know, a mob to this, I think it was an old schoolhouse, and showed up at this meeting. And when I got there, a policeman came up to me and said, "Do you want me to escort you?" And I said, "No way, I don't want you to escort me." And so because I didn't want to be seen escorting by a police officer amongst my constituents, you know. And I got in there, and they just would not stop screaming, you know, and they had all these crazy signs. And I'll never forget this woman who's right in the front row, stood up yelling, "Liar, liar, pants on fire." You know, it was just like children that had been, you know, I don't know, on some kind of drug or something. And but it was just maddening. And you know, tried to start and you know, explain the vote and explain the budget and everything, but this was just impossible. And so finally it ended, and we walked out of there, my wife and you know, a couple of aides, and Jane Kidd was there. You know, she was my district director. She had been my campaign manager in the first election. But you know, Jane, of course, is the chairman of the Democratic Party, or I guess is the director of the Democratic Party in Georgia now, and later became a state representative. But she was there with us, and Ben Kay, and this mayor of Grovetown, who felt so sorry because most of these people weren't from Grovetown. You know, they'd come from Augusta and wherever else this radio call guy reached. And the next day on Paul Harvey, he talked about my town hall meeting in Grovetown, and he said, you know, I don't know if I can imitate him, but you know how he used to talk was, he said he had to be escorted out by the police. And so, you know, of course that was not true, and I had my staff call and correct him and everything, so he dropped that before the end of the day. But that was the kind of, you know, town hall meetings we had. We had one here in Athens that was pretty raucous too. But you know, I had them literally all over the district, and they're all planned before this budget vote happened. You know, and I wasn't sure how I was going to vote when I planned them, but you know, if I had voted against it, they would have been much more pleasant. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's some of the issues that